שלום לכם וברוכים הבאים לערוץ טוב. אני עודד ניר. עוד רגע נתחיל בשיחה המאוד מעניינת עם פרנסיסקו גיל ווייט. הלו פרנסיסקו. אבל לפני זה,
היי עודד.
אתם מוזמנים להצטרף ל-130,000 המנויים של ערוץ טוב. יהיו חלק מהקהילה שלנו בלחיצה לכפתור, ההרשמה והפעמון מתחת לנגן. Hello Francisco, Gil White, how are you, man?
I'm good. How are you, Oded?
I'm
Nice
not
to meet
bad,
you.
not bad. Nice to meet you too, man. So, wow, this is a very interesting story. You actually born and raised in Mexico, and
Well, not born.
not born where?
No, I was born in Chicago, but I was
Chicago.
raised in Mexico.
In
I was
Mexico.
raised in
But you are Mexican origin, right?
I'm
Basically.
Mexican. Yeah, my family is Mexican. Yes.
And you're not Jewish, but
I'm not.
you chose Israel. You study here now in Israel. You came to study. You are out of the academy. And I'm like wondering to myself, how can a Mexican from Mexico and Chicago find himself in Israel during wartime? That's really, really interesting to me.
Well, actually, my only worry coming here was that the war would begin before I could get in, because I was sure that something was going to happen, and I was worried that maybe they would close the airports and I couldn't get in. But as it happened, I got here on February 5th, so I got to experience the war. Very interesting for me. I'm an anthropologist and a political anthropologist, and I'm very interested in the Arab-Israeli conflict, the geopolitics of the Middle East, and in general with the question of anti-Semitism and the history of the Jewish people. So coming to Israel for me is it's an obvious move. It's very interesting for me to be here. There's a lot of stuff for me to learn, and so that's what I'm doing.
So basically, you are the president of management of reality. Can you explain to me a little bit about this? You are the president of MORE. That's the MORE, right? So give me a little bit of a story.
Management of reality. The management of reality. That's right.
Management of reality, yeah. So what is that? What is it about?
Right. So we are trying to explain how the management of reality works. So our thesis is that from the beginning of Western democracy, we have been living in simulated democracies. So this is something that was explained by a great political theorist. His name was Maurice Joly in the second half of the 19th century during the French Second Republic, which then becomes the liberal empire of Louis Napoleon. During that period, Maurice Joly explained that Western democracy would not survive because Western citizens were allowing the governments to create clandestine services, intelligence services that spend the money of the citizens in secret. What Maurice Joly said is, if the citizens allow that, then bye-bye democracy, because the state bureaucrats or whoever controls the state bureaucrats are going to be using those clandestine services to corrupt the entire system. And so we're going to end up with a shell that looks like a democracy, but in reality, the various institutions are all going to be controlled by the center, by the clandestine center, and it'll become a simulation. It'll become a manipulation, and the citizens will eventually lose their rights and liberties. So this is Maurice Joly's model. It's the model that we defend as the correct model of what happens in modern Western democracies. And we've been trying to explain how the system works, how the media is controlled, the kinds of narratives that they use, the power that the people behind the scenes who control the meaning system have over the governments and other institutions and so forth. So we're trying to explain that.
Okay, so let me understand. I kind of made some preparation study about you before the interview, and I'm like wondering to myself, I understood that you made a research in the academy that made you kind of boycott it. Can you tell me a little bit about that research and what really happened there?
Well, I didn't boycott anybody. I was.
That's clear.
I was boycotting.
That's
It was
clear.
the
That's
other way
exactly
around.
what I meant. I said they
Oh, okay,
boycotted
okay.
your research. So explain to me
Right.
how come you made, what kind of research you made that puts you as outside from the academy.
Okay, so what happened was, so this whole business began when I arrived at the University of Pennsylvania, hired as a new professor in the psychology department. Now, the reason they had hired me there is that they were interested in my theory of racism. My PhD thesis produced a new theory of racism that was very interesting to them. So they hired me in the psychology department and also as a fellow in a center for the study of ethno-political conflict. Okay, so my theory is very broad. It's about how do people reason about ethnic groups, and how does that kind of reasoning help produce the political phenomenon of racism and ethnic conflict and so forth, right? Ethnic wars and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my PhD thesis was about. At the think tank where I was hired, the main ethnic conflict that they were interested in was the Arab-Israeli conflict. And there was a lot of attention paid to the Oslo process and the Arab-Palestinian movement and all these topics. So even though my PhD thesis was not about that specifically, my thesis is a general theory of ethnicity and racism. Once there, I started getting very interested in the Arab-Israeli conflict because they had, professors, invited professors who would give talks. The people working there were specializing in it. There was a lot of discussion of it, and of course, it was always in the news. It's the noisiest conflict anywhere in the world, and so forth. So I started getting very interested in this, and I started researching the history of the Zionist movement on the one hand, and the Arab-Palestinian movement on the other hand. And when I did this, I came across the figure of Haj Amin al-Husseini, the
Mm-hmm.
founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement.
Yeah.
And what I learned about this guy, it was all in the library and in the internet. It's not as if it was, hidden in that sense. And years before, all of this had been famous, but for several decades, nobody had been talking about the stuff that I now learned. And what I learned was that Haj Amin al-Husseini, founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement, is also responsible for the mass murder of the European Jews in what we call the final solution. So the German Nazi final solution at the highest level was organized by Adolf Eichmann. Everybody has heard about Adolf Eichmann, but what they don't know is that Haj Amin al-Husseini was co-leader with Eichmann of the entire German Nazi final solution. That's the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement. And after the war, he becomes mentor to Yasser Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas, and a few other adolescents who together become al-Fatah, which swallows the PLO and later got a new name when it was brought into Israel. It became the Palestinian Authority. So what I had before me was a story that said the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement becomes the top Nazi killer of Jews in Europe, and then creates an organization, al-Fatah, which the US presidents then force feed into Israeli territory.
Yeah,
And I
I've been. Yes, excuse me. Just finish your sentence.
Forgive me, just to finish. So
Yeah.
I published an article explaining all of this with the documentation, and the consequence of publishing that article is that I was fired from the University of Pennsylvania.
Wow. Over your thesis and research of Haj Amin al-Husseini. Wow. I actually, he kind of, the good point about this guy is that he died depressed in a refugee camp in Lebanon. I saw his funeral in an AP report from back in 1977, because in the end of the day, he lost his battle in his days. But that's a different conversation.
I disagree with you.
Why? Interesting.
I don't think he lost at all. Haj Amin al-Husseini, first of all, he won in World War II. His biggest dream was to kill every last living Jew. And working for the Nazis, he succeeded in killing between 5 and 6 million European Jews.
Well, he lost
before-
again. He lost against my grandpa, who were fighting against him here in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s.
Yes, he lost the war.
He
of
lost against
1960.
my grandfather won against him, and he
Yes.
told me about him. The funny part is that not in Israel until the last years nobody spoke about his part in the Nazi party, and especially in Europe and other parts, because nobody want to touch this hot potato of, let's say, the most sacred people on planet in this conversation. And it's
Well,
not the
that
Jews.
that goes to the other issue, right?
Yeah.
So how are these two issues connected? Because we started talking about the management of reality. Now we're talking about Haj Amin al-Husseini, who is the founding father of the Palestinian movement and author of the Holocaust, right? So how are these two things connected? Well, you just said it. Nobody wants to talk about Husseini. Why not?
It's a hot
How
potato.
come? But why? Why? The fact that nobody discusses Husseini is the demonstration that we are living in a managed reality. If we were not living in a managed reality, what would be the problem with discussing Husseini? We talk about Hitler. Why can't we talk about Husseini? We talk about Eichmann. Why can't we talk about Husseini? The reason is that the meaning system, the reality creating system, the big media institutions, the universities, and so forth, the ones that create meaning for millions of people, those institutions do not allow discussion of Haj Amin al-Husseini because they
Okay.
are protecting the Arab-Palestinian movement.
Absolutely. I would like to, let's take this point. Let's develop it for a second. How much does Qatar have with this issue of the academy, a lack of study, etc.? So how do you look at it? Well, just let me do a quick commercial and we're back. Please think about that. חברים יקרים, אנחנו צריכים את התמיכה שלכם כדי שנוכל להמשיך ולעשות את התוכן החשוב הזה והטוב הזה. כל האפשרויות לתמיכה בקישור מתחת לנגן. תודה. Fransisko, let's get to that. How come the academy is so one-sided and also hiding this point that that you actually a little bit revealed or put a little bit of a spotlight on, got you fired from the University of Pennsylvania?
So what's the role of Qatar in this? Is that the question?
Well, others, but how do you see it?
So look, a lot of people like the model that says that Qatar has been corrupting the U.S. university system. And it is true that Qatar has been sending a lot of money to Western universities and U.S. universities in particular, and especially the elite universities. That's all true. But to say that Qatar is the state that corrupted these universities or the media, I think, is a great distortion because the system was already corrupted. So before Qatar was a player, so if you go back to 1993, which is when Oslo I was signed, right? That's when the Oslo Accords were signed.
Yes.
You go back to that date, Qatar was not a player at all. Qatar was not funding U.S. universities in 1993. And yet,
but Europe was involved very much with the Oslo Accord, and Europe is the one who leads the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian movement worldwide. Is Europe, and Europe is the center of it. So, do you think the academy actually in Europe being completely, destroyed by Qatar?
Well, but that's my point. You're strengthening my point because the year we are discussing is 1993.
Yes.
In 1993, Qatar was not funding European universities or American universities. That was not happening in 1993.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So, and yet, everybody colluded to impose al-Fatah on the state of Israel. The European governments, the American government, the Soviet government, everybody, they all got together. Not the Soviet government, the Russian government. They all got together to pressure Israel to accept al-Fatah inside Israel. In fact, inside militarily strategic territory, because that's what Judea, Samaria, and Gaza are, right? So Qatar was not involved, and yet all of the universities, all of the mainstream media system, the governments of the West, they all colluded to create the Oslo process and to introduce this organization created by Hajj Amin al-Husseini to murder Jews into the state of Israel. So it's not Qatar. If you want to understand the role of Qatar in the modern world, you need to understand that Qatar is being used by the U.S. power elite, not the other way around.
Okay.
The real bosses are in Washington, of course.
Okay.
And
I'm actually wondering what is the role of Europe in this story, because what we're seeing right now is a major anti-Semitic wave happening across Europe. We see it in the States, we see it in Europe, and actually also the head of the European Union said that Europe now is the leader of the Palestinian cause and against Israel. So it's almost like unbelievable. If the 70s, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Saudi Arabia and Iraq, Libya were the leaders of the Palestinian cause, now is the West. And that's really a question that I'm trying to get from you. How do you see this happening? And what do you see of the role of Europe and the US in this story?
okay, but this is not new. So maybe it's more evident today, but this is not new. Don't forget, go back to 1993 again. It was the US and Europe that imposed the Oslo process on Israel. They've always been the leaders of the Arab Palestinian movement. The Westerners, look, when the first Intifada happened, when the Gulf War, the first Intifada and the Gulf War happened, right? The Palestinian movement lost almost all of its prestige in the Arab world. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with them, okay? Especially after the Gulf War, right? The only champion that the Arab Palestinian movement had was the US. Nobody wanted to support them, nobody in the Arab world. And PLO Fatah had already been defeated in 1982 by Menachem Begin when Menachem Begin invaded Lebanon, okay? Only a tiny remnant had survived. And that remnant had survived because of US intervention. Ronald Reagan had stopped Menachem Begin, and then he sent a military escort to bring PLO Fatah safely to its new home in Tunis. So this has always been going on. They've always been protecting the Arab Palestinian movement, and that's why you cannot speak about Hajj Amin al-Husseini. That's why the Western media system, Europe and the United States, and the Western university system, Europe and the United States, do not allow professors to talk about Hajj Amin al-Husseini and the role of Husseini in the Shoah.
Amazing. I must say, when you talk about Reagan in '82, it wasn't only Reagan. The British made a military embargo on Israel, the European, the Italians as well. Please don't drop the European involvement.
No, I agree with you.
You say a lot about the USA, but my feeling is Israeli that was. I always felt that Europe is way more progressed on pushing Israel to the points that you say. And look at because you talk about the Oslo Accords, that came after the Madrid Convention, that
That's
actually they forced Shamir to attend this this conference. Actually, that's the start of the problem, was Madrid. And then it moved to Oslo, and we rescued Fatah from their grave, which was, they got kicked out of Iraq, they got kicked out of Kuwait, they got kicked out of every almost place in the Middle East for the betrayal they showed on the Kuwaitis. The Kuwaitis, which supported them from the early 50s. It's amazing.
Right.
Who supported Fatah for all the years, and the PLFP, the החזית העממית לשחרור פלסטין, they got all the support out the Gulf. People have to learn that Saudi Arabia and the Kuwaitis, they kept them alive until the Gulf War. It was an amazing story for whoever missed it. But I would like to ask you about the current events.
Hmm?
You are talking a lot about US. So let me pick it up from there. I've been watching the last days an enormous eruption of anti-Semitic in the world, in North America, especially in New York. What I see in the last days across synagogues, in front of synagogues, the attacks that Jews go through there, I'm shocked from what's going on there, because, you know, for Israelis, you know, all these years you ask them, how are you doing? And if you want to say great, he says America. I'm doing America. I'm doing great. So explain to me how it really happened. What's going on right now on the field in the U.S. territory in regard to Jews?
Well, I'm actually not that well informed about the United States because I've been living in Israel. So
Good answer.
and before that, I was living in Mexico. So I'm not that well informed. I also don't follow it as closely. I've been very focused on the war here and on matters here. So I haven't been following it that closely. But I am aware that anti-Semitism is growing dangerously, of course. I predicted this would happen years ago. Everybody thought I was crazy. When I published my book in 2013, or my series of books in 2013, it's in Spanish. It's called "The Collapse of the West: The Next Holocaust and Its Consequences." I predicted that a new mass killing of Jews was going to happen in Israel, and everybody thought I was nuts. And then October 7th happened, and I went viral, somewhat viral. And my interpretation of what's going on is that we are living in the next Holocaust that I prophesied. This is where we are. I shouldn't say prophesied, predicted. It's a scientific prediction, and it hasn't ended. I don't know when it's going to end or if we're going to stop it, but it already began. It began on October 7th, and they won't stop unless we stop them. So I think it's important for the Jewish people and for all good conscience Westerners to understand that this is what's going on. We are in the same kind of process that we were in with the German Nazis in the mid 20th century. It's the exact same kind of process, and it's already begun.
I must say, I hear you. First of all, thank you for your concern and your worry. I must say, I really appreciate that on a personal level.
But it's not charity. No, I have to say this. It's not charity to the Jews. No, this is my self-defense. It's my concern for myself and for the non-Jews in the West. It's not charity to the Jews. Every time they attack the Jews, they come to enslave us, the Goyim. So the only way that this is going to stop is when the Goyim understand that the protection of the Jews is the same thing as Western self-defense. The fight against anti-Semitism is Western self-defense. It's not a gift to the Jews. It's a gift that we give ourselves, because that is the functional lever that determines whether the West becomes totalitarian or free. It's not merely a sign of what's going on. It's functional. In other words, the totalitarians attack the Jews because the Jewish people, Jewish civilization is the origin of the values of rights and liberties that helped us construct modern democracy. Without the Jewish people, everything collapses, and we saw it in the 20th century. So it's not generosity. It's self-defense.
Well, I totally agree with you. I don't see it as generosity. I see it as cleverness and smartness, and you are a smart guy, in a gentle way, I would say it, in a modest way. I would like also to try to, in a personal way, to understand something. What takes, I guess, a Catholic Mexican guy from Chicago to
Mexico
follow
City.
Mexico City. Thank you. But you grew up in Chicago, you said, so I was
No.
following
I
that.
was born
Born
in
in
Chicago.
Chicago,
I
sorry.
grew up in Mexico City.
Yeah. So a Catholic Mexican from Mexico City. What makes a guy like that put himself in a mess and follow, at the moment, the most persecuted people on earth? You're not Jewish.
Well, I mean, in a way, I already answered the question, because I think that if we don't do this, we are all doomed. So
yeah, but you
I
can
believe-
speak. Yeah, but you can speak on television. You can write books. But to actually come here and study and be here in wartime, it takes more than self-protection. There's something else here. I'm trying to understand it.
Okay, well, I mean, it's certainly true that I have great affinity for the Jewish people. I love the Jewish people in all their various shapes and forms, and I happen to be an anthropologist. I mean, anthropologists, we love foreigners. Foreigners are very exciting to anthropologists, and Jews are especially interesting because of the enormous impact that Jewish thought has had on Western civilization, and the positive impact, because if you look at the long sweep of history, if you go back 25 centuries in the West, Western societies were the worst societies on earth. They were governed by psychopaths who thought it was entertainment to, watch people get eaten alive. They had stadiums built for them to watch. There was psychopaths. That's what they were. And the impact of Jewish civilization on those psychopathic societies over the centuries was to transform the worst societies on earth into the best societies on earth. It's amazing that the Jews performed a sociological miracle on the West. So once again, we find ourselves in the West in a very, very dangerous moment. And the demonstration that we are in a very dangerous moment is that anti-Semitism is growing, because every time that anti-Semitism reaches fever pitch and mass attacks against the Jews are organized, every single time in Western history, without exception, the non-Jews are enslaved. They are killed and enslaved every time this happens. So
absolutely. I think. Yes, excuse me.
Just to answer your question, I am here because I realize that the great battle of our generation for the future of Western civilization is first and foremost here, because the West is now fighting jihadism. It's the greatest threat to the West, and the front line in the fight against jihadism is the state of Israel. And I want to be on the front line. I don't want to miss this show. I want to contribute my grain of sand and be like a fellow soldier with the Jews, because they are standing for all of the West, and I am in the West. I think I should show some solidarity.
Thank you. First of all, I really appreciate these strong words and that you're saying. I would like because unfortunately time is up, one last question that's interesting to me. I read that you defined yourself as a son of Noah, and you are following the 7 rules of Noah. Can you give our viewers a little explanation what it means, what you do, how do you look at it, what it means to be son of Noah?
Yes. So the B'nai Noah, the sons of Noah, or the children of Noah, are non-Jews who are enamored of Judaism and of the Jewish people. We accept the Torah as the book of God. So basically, our religion is Judaism, but we don't want to convert. We don't want to become Jews. So we stay goyim, we stay non-Jews, but we are within Judaism, because the rabbis created this category for people who want to accept Jewish ethics and the Jewish tradition, but do not want to have to follow all of the laws that religious Jews are obligated to follow. So it's a way of making Judaism open to the world, and making it easy for the Gentiles to find salvation without having to make everybody a full Jew. And what you are committed to as a son of Noah is to the 7 laws of Noah, the 7 Noahide laws, as they are also called.
Yes.
And these are they're the basic principles of ethics. Don't commit homicide. Don't blaspheme. Don't commit sexual immorality. Don't steal. You know, the basic principles of non-aggression. Don't be cruel to animals. And then the 7th law is, which is very important, is you must establish courts of law. In other words, you have to have your own system of laws. It's not going to be the Jewish system of laws. That's fine. So establish whatever system of laws you like, but it has to be consistent with these basic principles of Jewish ethics, so that we can all be, so that we can all get along and be nice to each other. That's the basic idea.
Well, Francisco, hermano, hombre, muchas gracias. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for everything you do for the people of Israel and the Jewish people. I wish I could hug you, but you're not here. And so
we can arrange one.
Let's do a hug. Let's arrange a hug between us. Francisco, thank you so much for your support and everything and for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
אם אהבתם את השיחה, תמכו בנו בקישור מתחת לנגן כדי שנוכל להמשיך ולהביא לכם את השיחות המרתקות. כל האפשרויות התמיכה בקישור מתחת לנגן. אני עודד ניר. תודה ולהתראות.